Welcome to those of you who have joined us already. We will allow for an extra moment or two for folks who are still trickling in. We're glad you're here. We'll get started in just a moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to VEIC's Clean Energy Call. VEIC is a sustainable energy company on a mission to generate the energy solutions the world needs. Our role as both implementers of energy efficiency programs and as consultants throughout the country has given us a direct view into the impact COVID has and will continue to have on clean energy work. We want to lean into the questions that many of us are grappling with who do this sort of work. During each of our clean energy calls, we will dive into one specific topic and hear from a diverse group of experts about the obstacles and opportunities we're facing together. Our goal is to have a frank conversation that spotlights smart strategies. And today's topic is improving indoor air quality in schools, how Vermont delivered. Thank you all for joining us. I also want to thank those of you who shared questions and comments when you registered. I will do my best to weave those into the discussion today, and I will also leave time at the end for additional questions for the panelists. My name is Jody Lesko, and I am the Director of Programs and Implementation for Efficiency Vermont, one of the energy efficiency utilities administered by VEIC. While my education and background are in health and human services, I have worked in program design and delivery in the clean energy sector now for over 10 years. I have had the great privilege of designing and deploying, in collaboration with my panelists, Vermont's Schools Indoor Air Quality Program this year, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And I am joined today by my esteemed panelists. Rachel Mascalino is a senior engineer in VEIC's Energy Services Department. Her work includes a focus on optimizing existing HVAC systems for efficiency and occupant comfort. Over the past 18 years, Rachel's background has included design, facility operations, engineering project management, and capital strategic planning. Rachel brings a deep and unique perspective to helping customers and programs utilize comprehensive HVAC and energy solutions. Thanks for being here, Rachel.
Thank you.
Jeff Francis is the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association and has served in that role since 1996. Jeff works closely with school superintendents on a wide array of education policy and management issues related to the education delivery system. He strives to create meaningful connections between the secretary and staff of the Vermont Agency of Education, the State Board of Education, and members of the Vermont General Assembly, representatives of the administration, and other education organizations and the business community. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Happy to be here.
Evelyn Killian is the Associate Principal with CX Associates. Evelyn is an architectural engineer and a certified energy manager with over 20 years experience in commercial and industrial buildings, project management, building commissioning, and energy analysis. Evelyn has extensive experience in energy efficient building design and operation, efficiency program design and implementation, and measurement and verification of energy efficiency measures. Her deep commissioning and retro-commissioning experience is demonstrated by her work on large commissioning projects at universities, schools, and commercial facilities throughout New England. Thanks for being here, Evelyn.
Glad to be here.
And Dan Riley is the Public Affairs Director for Efficiency Vermont. Dan has over a decade of experience in clean energy politics and policy at both the state and federal level, and in the private sector. Before moving to Vermont, Dan had served as the senior appointee in the administration of President Barack Obama and worked as communications director to Senator Ed Markey during the passage of the landmark Waxman-Markey climate bill in Congress. Dan also brings the experience of working for a variety of clean energy organizations, including the world's largest offshore wind company. Thanks for being here, Dan.
Pleasure.
So around the country, we are seeing a patchwork approach to schools reopening, with some states partially closed or operating a hybrid model, others ordering schools to open, and the majority leaving it to the districts or localities to decide. In addition to new cleaning and wellness procedures, indoor air quality improvements is one of the clear measures identified to prepare schools for in-person learning. And today we're here to talk about just that, indoor air quality improvements in schools, and specifically about Vermont's coordinated approach to this important work. And with that, I am eager to dive into these questions with my panelists. So starting with Dan and with Rachel, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about why an energy efficiency utility is involved in an indoor air quality program. We'll start with Dan.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jody, and thanks to everybody for being here today. Why Efficiency Vermont? Very briefly, again, Jody touched on this, but Efficiency Vermont was created 20 years ago to be the state of Vermont's energy efficiency utility. We're funded by a monthly surcharge on ratepayers' electricity bills. And with that, to help people save money on their electricity bills, we work in everything from working with individual homes on lighting decisions, appliance rebates, everything up to highly technical commercial rebates or commercial technical assistance with some of the state's largest customers. So because of that, Efficiency Vermont really had the staff, the statewide reach, the strong ties to the contractor community to really be able to ramp up very quickly. And I think, as you're going to hear from the other panelists as well, speed was very critical in all of this. The creation of this program and the funding was tied to schools reopening. And so we knew we wanted to ramp up very quickly. And so Efficiency Vermont had the systems in place and really the project management skills to really hit the ground running. There's always been a strong tie between indoor air quality and energy efficiency. That this is not a new space for us. Efficiency Vermont's been interested in the nexus of these two things for a long time. And for more on that, let me turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I want to highlight that I think EVT through VEIC was really well positioned, and a lot of it comes down to those relationships that you touched on, Dan. We have existing relationships not only with the design professionals like Evelyn's company, but also through the contractors and with the schools as well. So the staff that were working on these projects have worked with these schools in the past. We've been in these schools. We have relationships with the facilities folks, and that really on a short schedule that we had to deploy these measures and these funds, that was a huge advantage to not have to start from zero there. We also had the staff where we had the expertise to assess the validity of the measures and that were being promoted for indoor air quality. And we were able to make sure that all of the work being completed really aligned with the intent of the grant as defined by the General Assembly. And again, some fiscal responsibility there. We all wanted to make sure that the best work possible was being done to help the schools. We were able to build on that experience of indoor air quality across all market sectors that we have, and the experience of understanding how the energy impacts of improving indoor air quality, and leverage that expertise to make sure that the energy impacts of a particular scope of work in any of the school was not simply being the focus was not just a short-term fix. We were able to help schools take a long-term approach to make sure that comprehensive decisions and improvements were being made, and make sure that there were not going to be any energy problems in the future as they were operating these systems for improved indoor air quality.
Thanks, Rachel. For me, that brings up, oh, go ahead, Evelyn.
So I just want to, as an outsider, outside of VEIC and Efficiency Vermont, really echo what Rachel just said, that it was imperative for the industry or the commercial side of it, that the administrators of this program really understood the technical reasons for what the industry was coming up with as suggestions for the measures. That they, being the ones that were also doing the fiscal side of it, really understood what the priorities were and were thinking that long term. So everything that Rachel said was really valuable to not only the industry, but to the school and to the responsibility of the fiscal side of it, that it was, the money was spent on things that were thought out and long-term and really appropriate. And that was really very valuable and unique, I think, to this program, that we had an entity like VEIC that had that capability.
Thank you. I think that ties in nicely with my next question, which is about sort of the overall approach. Funding is always a piece of that puzzle. And so I'm curious, both Evelyn and Jeff, from your perspectives, how would you describe Vermont's approach to achieving good indoor air quality in schools prior to 2020, and what changed this year? And I'll start with you, Jeff.
So there's, in Vermont, tremendous variability in terms of the physical locations where schooling's created. I learned earlier today that there are 411 school buildings eligible for this program, and you could plot them on a continuum and find the most modern facility and the most antiquated facility. Because in public education there have been so many competing priorities, I would say that the overall approach to indoor air quality was not consistent on a school district to school district basis, and often reflected resources that they had available, staff training, physical condition of the building, and importantly, what the building was initially constructed with. So if you span the ages of school construction in the 20th century, you would find different approaches, and all those approaches have been in place and were found when the folks put this program underway, which has resulted in tremendous upgrade in a very short period of time.
And Evelyn, what would you add to that about the general approach and what's changed this year?
Yeah, I totally support what Jeff just said. We, have school buildings, small school districts, elementary schools where the buildings are more than 100 years old, very leaky buildings that rightfully so are focused on heating systems and not ventilation. And so the focus in the past has not been on ventilation, and the systems a lot of times are so antiquated that the focus now has been as much on making sure that the existing systems are operational as it is introducing ventilation, which has not been a priority in the past.
So we're not going to shy away from the fact that we're living through a pandemic, right? And so there's a certain part of that that has required a change in approach. And I'm wondering, we have talked a little bit about how this approach has changed, but I'm wondering if you can maybe spell out some of the ingredients that were necessary for a program like this to actually be successful. What was the recipe? What were the components that needed to come together in order to actually get this thing going?
From a measures perspective, you mean what kind of measures we needed to implement?
No, I'm thinking more about of sort of the more broad approach. Like, what are the pieces that had to come together to make it happen?
The thing was, so we got the money in the beginning of July, I think, and we had the timeline that we wanted to have things identified and implemented, if possible, by August. And so at the same time that we were developing the program, we were implementing the program. And what had to happen immediately was that VEIC and Efficiency Vermont had to focus on you know, greasing the skids, if you will, to get the funding in place and to get the contractors and everything on board, that people knew who to contact, that the schools knew who to contact for the different questions. At the same time that organizations like us were out going to the schools to try to help them prioritize their measures, what they needed to implement immediately. So it was coming at it from both sides, and that was why, again, it was so critical that VEIC was involved, that they had the ability to really make all of those resources come together so that entities like ours could highlight the measures that needed to be implemented or prioritized for specific buildings, that we were the boots on the ground and going into the specific buildings, and contractors could be allocated to start as quickly as possible for implementation.
Yeah, so it sounds like really what you're identifying is the need for sort of a hub or a coordinating role. There's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving pieces that needed to be coordinated.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan.
I was just going to say, in terms of what needed to happen to have this be created, I think from a public policy standpoint, using the CARES Act funding to be able, using federal CARES Act funding to create this program was a key ingredient of this. You know, here in Vermont, politically, it made it quite popular to be able to use federal funding for this. And, you know, I had one senator say to me, you know, these upgrades are going to get made, they need to get made either way. You can do it with CARES Act funding, or you can do it by raising property taxes in the coming years. I feel like, you know, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, everybody understands that. And so, you know, as we look to any other future federal stimulus, you know, for people tuning in today from outside of Vermont, you know, I think that was really key to unlocking this and moving forward with strong support and moving forward quickly in the legislature.
Thanks for that, Dan.
If I could add briefly to that, from my perspective, working with the school superintendents and school boards across the state, what I saw was a program that was built on existing components that came together in a trust relationship. And in my view, this program can be replicated if you have the program components. I think the ability to pull it together in such a short timeline was heavily reliant on trust. So the General Assembly, who allocated the funds, knew of the work of VEIC and EVT and had confidence in that work. EVT had relationships with both the contractors and the school districts and allowed them to sit at the hub and basically run a turnkey program. And as somebody who has to pay really close attention to the best utilization of funds and making processes as straightforward as possible for school districts that are overburdened with an array of initiatives, it was a pleasure for me to have an awareness of VEIC and EVT's work and support them in pulling this program together. So all the pieces were there, but having an entity like VEIC and EVT available to make all the connections and take it from their work with the legislature to get it funded all the way to, you know, the last improvement that's going to be made in a school under the program, and have them shepherd that process every step of the way was really invaluable.
Thanks, Jeff. So let's dig into some of those nitty-gritty components here. So obviously, a few of you have mentioned time and the short timeline that we're working under. And so I think there are a couple of components that needed to be stood up very quickly in order to actually get the work going. So there's a sort of program design and the nuts and bolts of that, as well as the work that needed to happen in the buildings where education is happening. So I can cover the programmatic piece, and that I would love for Evelyn and Rachel to come in and talk about the roles that you and the folks on your team have played. So from a programmatic standpoint, I think the very first step that we took was to really clearly define the objectives of the program and how we would actually achieve those objectives. And that did come from, direction from the General Assembly, but also working with a really broad group of stakeholders very quickly, right? Bringing those people together and really understanding, like, what are we trying to achieve here? And what's the best way for us to do that? Once that objective was clearly defined, I think preparing internally, right? Like Dan, you mentioned, one of the reasons why VEIC and Efficiency Vermont was selected to deploy this is that we do have infrastructure for deploying programs. And so preparing those systems, those tools, and our own staff, I think is another thing that needed to happen very quickly. This, of course, is a federally funded program, and so some of the documentation requirements are quite specific. So all of those needed to be folded into sort of what Evelyn rightly said is both the deployment, the design and deployment sort of somewhat happening at the same time, just because of the urgency that we were facing. And you're right, Evelyn also mentioned sort of that mobilization of the supply chain and the engagement of our contractor network. So we do have these relationships that allowed us to say, hey, distributors, manufacturers, contractors, installers, like this is coming. We would really love for you to support this work, and how can we work together to make this happen quickly? And then finally, of course, we had to engage schools. So schools themselves knew that this was happening. They were paying attention to these funding opportunities that were coming. And so we started getting questions as soon as that information started coming out of the General Assembly. And so I think that is sort of the sort of piece of the program design and sort of the nuts and bolts of getting something stood up and off the ground. And then I'd like to turn it over to Evelyn, because I feel like you, although you were involved very much in the design of the program, also then took the baton as schools started calling you. So talk a little bit about your role, Evelyn, and your team's role.
Yeah, thank you. So I work for a engineering consulting firm where we do building commissioning and retro commissioning. So we've been in a lot of buildings. We got calls almost immediately when the funding was at least allocated. It wasn't finalized yet, but schools started calling immediately. And we quickly realized that what the schools needed first and foremost is just somebody to come in and give them a sense of what the priorities are for their particular building. And we wanted to do this as streamlined as possible, because we don't want to spend any more money than absolutely necessary on identification, because we want to allow for the money to be spent on implementation. So we streamlined our site visits to be very quick, immediate turnaround if possible after that someone calls us, and that we would just spend, say, an hour in a building to talk with the facilities person, or in a lot of cases the principal, to highlight. Mainly, we ended up working in 3 different areas, and one was ventilation. Do you have any ventilation at all? And what are your needs for ventilation? Whether that's a whole new system, what does that entail? Or does it mean tweaking the existing system that you have? Filtration, do you have a good filtration level? And then, well, I guess 4. Then the equipment that you have, does it actually work? And then the 4th one is an isolation room in case there is, a person that is sick, that they can be isolated from the rest of the school. And so we focused on those 4 things pretty quickly. The thing that we saw right away is that the person that we were speaking to was completely overwhelmed. This was before school was starting. Nobody knew what this was all about. Nobody knew how dangerous air and aerosols were, and nobody had a clear definition of what the solution is, and nobody knew what the school year was going to look like, and I guess nobody still knows what the school year is really going to look like. But that meant that these poor facilities or administrators, they had so much on their plates, and they didn't know where to start, and they didn't know how to prioritize, and they were completely overwhelmed. So having somebody that knew the HVAC system and could simply and quickly identify what their priorities should be. And then having that, so we would put a quick report together with a table saying, you know, do these 6 things, focus on these 6 things for your building specifically. And we would send that off to VEIC, and they would determine from all of their requests, they would determine, okay, how much money was allocated to each particular building. And then we could work from there with a contractor to say, okay, there's enough funding for these things, the priorities are this, and now let's just get to implementation. So I think that was the biggest thing, is helping these people identify for their building what are the priorities, and let's do it as quickly as possible to get a contractor to implement those. Yeah.
Yes. So it sounds like really it's an effort to focus, right? When there's so much chaos, right, and overwhelm. The role of you and your team really was to help people focus on the highest priority things, right? And to make that simple, make something that is invisible and complex simple. And Rachel, go ahead, Evelyn.
Oh, I just want to say too that having some comfort in that they're doing something, but that you know, that we all acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know, and this is all new for everybody, and we're making it as safe as possible, gave them just some comfort. So in addition to all those things, that was really important.
Yeah, sort of simplify and support. Yeah. So, Evelyn, after you and your team did this sort of assessment work initially, you mentioned that it would then be passed to someone like Rachel, or a person on her team. So Rachel, talk about the role that your you and your team played in this whole process.
So after a company like Evelyn's would go into these schools, that really gave us a great place to start from. Throughout this initiative, myself and my team, we were not able to make site visits. We worked with over 300 schools, and just because of the timing and many of the COVID regulations, we just weren't able to go and visit all of these schools. So out of those over 300, a handful of them received this initial assessment, and that was wonderful. That was a great place to start a conversation, and we do see high turnover with our facilities folks in some areas, and so that institutional knowledge that they held, there was a lot of diversity there about what they knew, the foundations of their knowledge about their mechanical system. So once we were able to get that starting point about what they had to work with, like Evelyn said, the priority quickly became ventilation. And what is your ventilation? Do you have any? Is it enough? Do you have any idea where it's coming from? Is there deferred maintenance associated with it? And that was really the overarching message that we really tried to portray and to help prioritize, was that we want to focus on the areas that are going to have the highest occupancy for the highest amount of time. And under the initial plan, as students were returning back to schools, it was easy to identify that that was classrooms. So we could distill that even further to say, of all of the plates that you're spinning right now, facilities team, what is the ventilation in the classrooms, and what can we do to improve that, get some if there's none, and how can we use this grant funding to really set you up for strategic improvements in the future, and really avoid those band-aids of, this is going to get us through Christmas, we could do this. We really wanted to use this money, kind of as Dan alluded to, let's capitalize on this federal funding, and instead of raising taxes and having that technical approach to help guide the measures that were really being implemented in a short amount of time, our team really worked as a technical project manager throughout the whole process with that facilities team. So after that information was handed to us from CX Associates, we would help them maybe reach out to other contractors who we had relationships with to talk about lead times for equipment, or what could be implemented, or what measurements needed to be taken and where that biggest impact would be in the shortest amount of time for the money that was available.
That's great. Thank you. It strikes me that a lot of us have talked about the challenges, some of the challenging components of this. So I want to turn the conversation specifically in that direction now. So I'll start with Jeff and then follow up with Rachel. But what challenges are we facing as Vermont sort of does this work in this program? Jeff,
Well,
go ahead.
When you take a look at the program in general, and I think the challenges have been mentioned and the response has been mentioned, but I'll just say that we've got school districts with tremendous variability in terms of their capacity. So if the folks on the call could envision the most suburban school district in the country, we've got a school district that replicates that. If you think about the most rural area with an area of disinvestment, we have school districts that represent that. So the program needed to be able to respond effectively to each of those types of schools and everything in between. In addition to that, there are millions of dollars of investment being placed in these schools over a very short period of time. So the management of the contractor community and the ability to induce contractors to take the work at a time when they perhaps didn't have much work. So there was an extraordinarily rapid mobilization. A third challenge was, and this has also been referred to, having the folks that are running these systems in the schools actually understand the systems themselves. And I think Vermont's done a pretty good job at that in recent years, but with the turnover in facilities personnel, you still have to find people who can come in, communicate with school personnel at their level, and then help arrange, organize, explain, and undertake the work in a very short period of time. So that was a challenge. Another thing that should be considered is just sort of the regional differences. So although Vermont is a small state geographically, when you consider it in terms of what exists in each region, not only are the schools different, but the contracting communities are different. So, you know, at the outset of this program, I myself heard from facilities managers that this is a good program, but maybe they can't find the people to do the work in their region. And I think that EVT, VEIC, and all of their partners have done a great job in responding to those issues. So that's just a few. One other thought is this work is happening in an era where we're trying to figure out a way to create massive investment in our schools. So we understand that the capital needs of the schools are pretty extensive. And I think that this program and its success is going to help kickstart an era, I hope, of greater investment in terms of improving our school facilities overall.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Rachel, what would you add about the challenges that we're facing?
So the short answer is time. I mean, for some of our schools, these improvements in the absence of a pandemic would likely have happened over an 18 to 24 month period, including strategic planning, engineering services, funding, all of that. I mean, we really took that down to a month and a half, 2 months in some instances. And that's challenging. I won't say it's not doable because we did it and it's happening. But it's intimidating when you think of from an engineering and project perspective, that time frame, that's very intimidating. Also, we're doing this work to improve these schools, which are so vulnerable, in a time when every other building in the rest of the country is looking to do the exact same thing. So high MERV filters, HRVs, dedicated outdoor air units, energy recovery wheels, components, even outdoor air damper actuators, all of these things. We were seeing lead times just tick up by the day. If you didn't order it on Monday, the lead time was an extra week if you waited till Wednesday. And that also, just the ticking time clock on all of this made it very challenging. And there was a lot of, we're just competing against a market of some mass purchasing that was happening in other areas of the country. So 20 ERVs going to the Northeast Kingdom maybe was not the priority for some of the suppliers.
Right. Yeah, I think we remarked often early on that time was definitely crunched, but the thing that crunches is also the availability of equipment and qualified installers, right? So if we had had that 18 to 24 month construction timeline, which is normally where we would be operating in, it probably would have not seemed as intimidating, but doing so in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, definitely it changed the equation for sure.
Yeah,
on the flip side of that, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
So you reminded me of the contractor base, right? So some of the work, it's almost like we were able to compress all of the work that these contractors would have done maybe over 2.5 years into a few months. And so the demand just was insane for a state where we're low on the trades anyway, on a good day, on an average summer where you're trying to do a project in a school. And there were our test and balance contractors in Vermont. I mean, the backlog now is out into February or March if you were looking for some of that work to be completed now. So there were limitations for sure in what we could do. And yeah, it comes back to time, but it's the contractors, it's the supply chain, it's all of that.
And I think Evelyn and you both have also commented that, like, as things became constrained, you also pivoted, right? So if something wasn't available, you found another solution. I think that's another thing that was a really strong component of meeting this need on the time frame that we had with the resources that we had. So I think that is a huge strength of what we've been able to do together. And thinking about, there are also some opportunities here that this sort of work and doing this sort of work in this way uncovers. So I'd like to hear from Dan, Evelyn, and Jeff on this, and I'll start with Dan.
Sure. Thanks, Jody. As is so often the case, the opportunities are very, very closely related to the challenges here. We talked about the crunch for contractors, but certainly this is a huge opportunity for the HVAC and the controls contracting community in our state. We're seeing, full employment, crews book solid through, as Rachel said, through February, pulling in crews from out of state. And so, we know these are good paying jobs. We know they have follow-on economic benefits. So that's been a real opportunity there. Rachel also touched on the availability of equipment. We did see that bulk purchasing of equipment can reduce upfront costs. And, if we're seeing this in Vermont, one of the smallest states that there is, I think you could achieve even greater savings in much larger states. I had touched on the political benefits earlier, at a time when there have been a lot of contentious debates related to COVID emergency response. This is one that was very, very popular, that was able to get done quickly. And finally, again, to take it back to that link with energy efficiency, there is an opportunity for real savings here. I can give you one example. Last year, not with this program, with an unrelated program, we worked with one high school in Stowe, Vermont, and through making a lot of these upgrades, we were able to help them save $16,500 a year just on their electricity bill. And there isn't a school board in America that wouldn't love that. That's one school, and that goes to some of the equipment upgrades, but also what Jeff had said, a real key point in terms of working with the facilities managers, helping them better understand these systems. And so, I can turn it over to Jeff and Evelyn for any sort of specific on-site opportunities, but at the macro level, those are the big ones.
Evelyn, from your perspective, I'd like to hear about the opportunities that you're seeing.
So a lot of these old buildings, we as a state haven't funded preventative maintenance and just ongoing maintenance. So the money and the attention that we have been giving the schools has really helped bring the existing equipment up into good working order, and making the buildings more comfortable by increasing or providing ventilation air where there hasn't been ventilation. I think is a very long-term strategy or long-term benefits. And the fact that that people like us, so consultants as well as Efficiency Vermont and VEIC, having the technical people involved means that we're looking at the efficiency of these systems, and we're hopefully doing this in an efficient, energy efficient manner, so that the benefits are done efficiently, and will have benefits. That the changes will be done efficiently, so that the building will be seeing lower operating costs than would have happened if somebody, didn't design the system with efficiency in mind. And the other thing, as Dan alluded to also, Vermont, because of the pandemic, is not seeing very much construction right now. So in the short term, from mid-summer, at least through the end of this year, we're seeing that we're really able to take advantage of the construction world having time to respond to this. So it's economically a really positive thing for Vermont.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Evelyn. And Jeff, from your perspective, what opportunities are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think that Evelyn and Dan captured it really well. I'd add just a couple thoughts. One is we're going to try to induce more investment in the physical plant that are public schools in Vermont moving forward, and to get this window into the deficiencies that this program responded to really gives us a lead in terms of having public policymakers understand the need for investment. So that's one. Two, not every program that involves partnerships and public sector entities ends well. And I think that whenever we can induce confidence in our public systems by coming together in a partnership, that's a really good demonstration project, so that when you go back looking for more public investment to improve facilities, whether they're schools or facilities in general, it's great to have this kind of experience under your belt. And then finally, and I touched upon this a couple of times, school staff are not all of the same qualifications, and to have the facilities and maintenance personnel, as well as administrators and school board members, understand a little bit more about their schools and how they function in a modern society through a program like this creates an advantage and an opportunity as well.
Yeah, there have been some things that this has catalyzed, right? In lots of different ways, for sure. Thank you for that. We do have one more discussion question that I'm going to pose to the panelists, but I am pausing now to alert those of you who are participating with us and attending that I will also be opening up for questions in a few minutes. So if you have questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, please feel free to use that function. I will keep an eye on those as we discuss our final question, and then we'll turn to the questions from the audience. So the final discussion question for the panel, and I'll pose this to Rachel and Dan specifically, is how closely does this experience here in Vermont mirror the rest of the country? Obviously, we have people on the call today from all over, and there are some components that are likely similar, but there are some components that are quite different. So I'm going to start with Rachel to speak to that from your perspective.
Thanks, Jody. No matter where you are in the country, HVAC is a key component to good indoor air quality. So whether you're in Vermont or Florida or California or anywhere in the middle, that is unchanging. There is a foundational engineering and building science of HVAC that goes into making these improvements. And so although Vermont may seem very small or different from the state that you're sitting in, the technology of HVAC and indoor air quality is exactly the same. And many of the measures that we implemented and helped propose here for our schools in Vermont are exactly the measures that would work to improve indoor air quality in any school across the country. I think where we would differ a little bit is that throughout New England, we have a very old building stock. I think Evelyn referenced an elementary school that was over 100 years old. And in this old building stock in New England, where we're a heating dominant energy climate zone, we have a lot of buildings that were designed possibly 100 years ago for heat only. And so we did come across many schools that had radiant heat and operable windows, and that was their HVAC system. I'm not sure that that would really translate exactly to many other regions across the United States. But and again, as Jeff alluded to, we also have very modern schools with fully functional central systems. And so we were adapting to their needs and helping them make improvements. But I think that the similarities really outweigh the differences in terms of the project cross-section that we worked with here in Vermont. And I do think that there are a lot of good takeaways in terms of replicating this program as it was administered to other areas of the country.
Thanks for that, Rachel. And Dan, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. I do think there are a lot of things that are unique to Vermont, but they're not things that couldn't be overcome if the will is there to really do this. I think first and foremost, having an energy efficiency utility model. We're one of just 2 states that has a dedicated entity that only does energy efficiency, and so we had a little bit more bandwidth. In a lot of places, the efficiency programs are run directly through the utilities, and which have a lot of other concerns and things to juggle. And so it's about really carving out the space and the time to be able to do that. The political environment here in Vermont, where you had a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature come together very quickly with sort of minimum acrimony to do that. You don't see that in too many places, but again, it's about making it a priority. I can't say enough good things about Jeff and about the Vermont Superintendents Association and how all of the actors involved, whether it was the superintendents, the principals, the NEA, everyone came together very quickly to do this and had everybody's best interest at heart. In terms of program creation, to the best of our knowledge, Vermont and California are really the only states that we've seen so far that have created this type of program. The Vermont example is more of a one-off, like I said, tied to that CARES Act funding in terms of having to have these programs completed by the end of the year. California, it's a bigger 3-year program tied to a much larger air quality bill, AB 848. That's a bigger school energy efficiency stimulus program. So it's a little bit different with a longer time frame, but that's all we've seen so far.
Thank you for that. So we do have some questions coming in too. So I'm going to just give folks on the call a little bit of time to type their questions in. While I'm doing that, I want to thank the panelists for your answers so far. And I suspect with the questions that are coming in that you'll have some opportunity to share even more of your expertise. So let me start with the first one, and this one will be for Rachel and Evelyn. How much of a problem was or is getting the work done with students or staff in the building? So of course the goal was to get the work done in the summer when the buildings were unoccupied, but of course that's not possible, as we've talked about. These are not necessarily overnight types of projects. So I'll start with Evelyn and then go to Rachel.
Yes, that is a definite issue. So here in Vermont, most schools are not operating 100% or every day of the week. And they're not operating all day. And so the contractors are working around those spaces, and the schools are trying to help work around the spaces. So if we need to be in specific classrooms at any one time, right now, it has been the case that we've been able to have classes outside so that the contractors can be inside or work. They have the opportunity to be in different classrooms if contractors need to be in. Also, school is out, mid-afternoon at the latest, so contractors are working later. Mm-hmm. It is a shuffle. It is difficult. We did do quite a bit of repairs, at least before schools started. So now it's more of the bigger items, such as putting in a new HRV system, and contractors are working around a school schedule, and schools are trying to help. But it is it is tricky. Like we've all been saying, there's so much goodwill and trying to work together, and we all realize that we're in a really unique moment in time where we do have to work together, that contractors are bending over backwards trying to make it work, and schools are also trying to make it work. So it's tricky, but you just need goodwill on everybody's part.
Yeah. Rachel, what do you have to add to that?
A lot of overtime is the answer to that. A lot of off hours work, a lot of a scope of work that I may have seen a year ago. You know, that price is times 2 in some cases because of having a large crew in a school for a short amount of hours on a Saturday. And because of the time, it's not over, right? Like there will be work being done on December 29th of this year to complete this work and use as much of this grant funding as possible before the end of the year.
100%. Dan or Jeff, anything to add?
I don't know.
I'm going to move on to our next question, and I think this is also for Rachel and Evelyn. To what extent were energy savings collected as part of this effort? And if so, was the program effectiveness compared to existing or previous programs administered? Actually, I think I'll have Rachel start, and then I might talk a little bit about the program administration. So again, were energy savings collected as part of this effort? And if so, how was the program effectiveness compared to existing or previous programs administered? So Rachel, go ahead.
Yes, savings were collected and will continue to be collected. In terms of effectiveness, we looked at most all of these projects as what we consider a market opportunity. So as you're installing new equipment, is it better than our current Vermont energy standard, which is pretty aggressive? So it would be the exact same savings claim on a high performing ERV that's going in under this program as it would be under our typical commercial program that Efficiency Vermont operates. So that in terms of effectiveness, I would call it equal, if that answers the question. And I think that back to my original, I think my first question was about why this is a good fit for an efficiency utility to be involved in this. And I think of a lot of the controls measures that we saw. A lot of controls work was done, and some of the ASHRAE, early ASHRAE guidance that came out was 100% outdoor air all the time. Well, that's wonderful if you live in a mid-Atlantic state. That's not going to work in Vermont in the winter. We don't have heating systems that can keep up with that, and keeping students and staff warm is also indoor air quality. So we had to do a lot of balancing. And if some of these contractors or facilities folks had reacted to some of that ASHRAE guidance verbatim, people would be uncomfortable and it would be a huge energy penalty. And we were able to work with controls contractors on an economy of scale to get some sequences written and applied that really balanced that indoor air comfort for the occupants with as much ventilation as possible.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Yeah, and I think there's not a lot I need to add about the sort of program effectiveness. I think you're right. Where there were efficiency measures that were similar to other measures that we would take in our efficiency program, we utilized those measures and those assumptions. I think what we also recognize is that in upgrading systems, in installing newer systems, in looking at software upgrades for pandemic mode, for controls, that sort of thing, we know that when the pandemic resolves, we are more able to do energy efficiency measures in the future as well, right? This also, that's another opportunity that we've talked about is, as we are able to return to more baseline, controls, ventilation, filtration, that we have the ability to do that with a higher degree of energy efficiency than we would have previously. I'm going to transition us to our last question for the panel before we close us out. We've got about 6 minutes left. So I'm assuming that folks on the phone are interested in getting an indoor air quality program off the ground or in somehow benefiting from programming of this nature. So I'm curious from everyone on the panel, this sort of like nuggets of wisdom that you might share based on the experience that you've had with this program so far. And I'll start with Evelyn.
Yeah, so like we've mentioned a bunch of times, that having a central hub of for the high level fiscal responsibility and technical knowledge to kind of have an overview of the whole program is really important, so that we are spending the money efficiently and effectively, having the impact that we need, and then having the second level of having a consultant be able to come in and really identify for the building specifically what are the priorities that is going to have the biggest impact on their building. I think those two levels are really, really critical to have before you start implementing anything. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Evelyn. Rachel.
My takeaway is that indoor air quality it's not cutting edge technology. And I think that was a great benefit to this program. We were not relying on anything that was cutting edge or unknown. We know what makes good indoor air quality, and just really from an engineering standpoint, coming back to that foundational knowledge and knowing that these improvements that we can make are going to be sustainable and comprehensive and make these schools better, not just between now and Christmas or the end of the school year, but really for hopefully decades to come. And this has just been a great platform, this whole initiative, as a starting point to think about HVAC and indoor air quality, something that nobody was really thinking about a year ago, right? So the discussions I'm having with principals and superintendents and school boards and the community, people care and they want to do the right thing, and just relying on that foundation of good building science and mechanical engineering, we can get there.
Thanks, Rachel. And Jeff.
I actually, as an entity that works with schools on a lot of different initiatives, I saw 5 distinct learnings in this one, and they are: leverage your established relationships, rely on the expertise that's available, respect the central role that an entity like VEIC and Efficiency Vermont can play as sort of the brokers of the entire arrangement, always be available to provide constructive input, and work to maximize all available resources.
Thank you. And you were always available to me when I needed you. Thank you for that. And Dan.
Yeah, I would just say, keep an eye on Congress. Additional federal funding for school reopening. It's something that was included in both the House and the Senate versions of the next stimulus bill. It remains to be seen if something can be passed, but that additional federal funding can help overcome the political challenges, but it's also very closely tied to the supply chain comments that we're talking about today. And if you are seeing 10, 20, $50 billion of federal funding injected in this, supply chains are going to get very, very tight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that the overarching theme here is that while other localities may not have the exact recipe that Vermont has, the fundamentals of this approach are transferable and they're scalable. And there is likely to be federal funding, and VEIC obviously has learned a lot in partnership with folks like Jeff and Evelyn and their team. We are ready, willing, and able, I think, to help other localities navigate this as this unfolds. So I want to offer myself, my contact information is up on the screen. I want to offer myself, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have about today's discussion. I want to thank my panelists for sharing their expertise and experience today, and for all of our attendees for joining us. We invite you to join us again next week at the same time for a conversation on clean energy's role in the economic recovery. Thanks so much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.